How's it going, everybody? So in this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about starting strength 3x5 linear progression. So keep in mind, linear progression, that is the typical recommendation for a novice lifter. A novice lifter, the definition is simply a lifter who has yet to go through a 3x5 novice linear progression, or a lifter who is currently in a linear progression and they're able to add 5 pounds to their squat, their bench press, or overhead press every single training session, typically 3 times a week, okay? Or at the very least progressing from session to session, sometimes 2 times a week. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the starting strength linear progression, I highly recommend that you buy the book Practical Programming for Strength Training, 3rd edition, and read the novice section, because everything we'll be talking about is in that novice section. But for the purposes of this video, just be familiar with the basic split, the A-B split, okay? You can just look that up on Google Images and you can find a graph that just has the starting strength A-B split 3x5. So it seems to me like there's a lot of people who are not familiar with how to change it to continue progress and as efficiently and fast as possible. A lot of people are not familiar with the different variations you can use for the starting strength novice linear progression to keep it going and recover in between sessions once you start to hit plateaus as you get stronger. So essentially, just a basic overview, you have the A and B split on the linear progression. Both A and B days you're going to be squatting a 3x5. And it's essentially, a max effort set of 5, 3 sets of 5. Pretty much you'll get to a point after the first, 6 weeks or so, where every 3x5, every set of 5 is basically feeling like an RPE 10, basically all out sets of 5. So squatting every day, basically every training day, 3 times a week. And then you have bench press on one day and barbell overhead press on the other day. And you just rotate between bench press and overhead press on A and B days. Now, you'll see a wide variety of different recommendations for deadlift, bent over row, and basically training the lower back and the hamstrings using the starting strength linear progression. For me personally, what I like is, because you're training 3 times a week and you're squatting heavy, like to a max effort 3x5 every single training day. And if your squat technique is good, depending on your squat technique, if you're using the starting strength style squat, you'll be getting a lot of lower back and hamstring activation every single day anyway. And I find people tend to run into plateaus, and more specifically, they get really, really sore. And the squats are a lot grindier simply because they're doing too much posterior chain work. They'll recommend like deadlift every other training session when you first start out. And that is going to, especially because you just keep training with no deload, your lower back is going to have, and your hamstrings are going to be increasingly fatigued, and it's just going to keep building up over time. So you'll be really sore and have like achiness in your lower back and your hamstrings, depending on the person, obviously. But especially as this progresses, that posterior chain fatigue is going to add up from all the squatting and even deadlifting once a week with no deload. Personally, what I like, and again, it's going to depend. Like, if you're a brand new lifter, or if your deadlift is just simply not that good, for most novice trainees, you're going to want to deadlift at least once a week to that, top 5 rep max, basically, is what the deadlift recommendation is. 1 set of 5 every week, and just add 5 pounds, or every 3 training sessions, something like that. Now, once your squat gets into the higher 200s on the 3x5, and your deadlift is in the 300s, okay, you know, depending on the body weight, but, you know, it's going to be easier or harder depending on how heavy or light you are, your body weight is. But as a general recommendation, once your deadlift gets into the 300s, especially the mid 300s, and your squat hits the mid to high 200s, you're probably going to want to reduce your posterior chain work even more so. Otherwise, you're going to notice a lot more interference with your squat workouts. So, replacing a lot of those deadlift sessions with barbell row. Like, so for example, let's say you have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Changing the pulling variation and just making it kind of like a completely different rotation rather than including it on the A-B split. Now you're going to, because on Friday you'll have the whole weekend of recovery after the training week, having Friday as that deadlift day, and then Monday is going to be the 5 sets of 3 power clean, and then Wednesday either no posterior chain work at all, or you could do like a bent over row or something. Or just, but I would recommend just Mondays the power cleans, Wednesday is like the chin ups, you know, and then Friday is the deadlift day, okay? And just making that change, you know, alone is going to allow you to keep progressing the deadlift and progressing the squat, and without the overuse and the fatigue building up that a lot of people run into. A lot of people are just deadlifting way too often. And there's other recommendations, and generally once you hit a certain point, the deadlift is kind of like put later on, like every 5th training day anyway. So you may not even have to do that, but that's what I like as a standard variation. So now what we get into after we got the posterior chain fatigue kind of like ruled out and managed, because that's a huge problem that a lot of people run into and they're not aware of. It's just like deadlifting too frequently. We'll combine with the squats. Once you start to plateau on the squat, so let's say the first time you plateau on the squat, right? Like maybe your 3rd set of squats, you only get 3 reps, or maybe usually you'll get like 4 reps, and then that last one, you fail, basically. But you start missing reps on that squat workout. The typical recommendation is to reduce the weight by like 10 to 15%. Generally, you know, taking, you know, 15 to 20 pounds off the bar, and then just working your way back up 5 pounds at a time, you know, and then passing that previous plateau. That is basically giving your body kind of like a deload week or a lower stress week, and allowing the adaptation, or allowing the recovery to catch up with the adaptation. And that is a good recommendation for the first time you plateau the squat. Now, if you're in the mid 200s for your 3x5 on your squat, especially if that deadlift is past the 300s, after that first kind of like, you know, deload or drop back week or whatever, after the first time you reset the squat, it's probably a good idea to start kind of reducing your frequency maybe. So if your bench press and your overhead press is still progressing, then you should probably, you know, and maybe you're using micro plates. Like, obviously micro plates is a good adjustment, first of all, where instead of adding 5 pounds every week, you're adding micro plates per workout. So, you know, I have a set of, you know, 1 pound plates, 1/4 pound plates, 1/2 pound plates, and I'll just micro load to where instead of adding 5 pounds a workout, I'm adding, you know, 2 pounds a workout, or maybe 2.5 pounds per workout. That way, every 2 workouts, I've accumulated 5 pounds on the lift. And typically, upper body lifts are the ones you're going to have to do this more frequently with. But microloading is one way to do it. Now, once you hit a plateau with the microloading, so if your upper body lifts are still increasing, but you plateau with the squat, and you're like, you miss reps or whatever after already resetting the squat. Now you can add in the light day on Wednesday, where your, Wednesday squat workout is like 80% of Monday's squat workout. And then Friday you add 5 pounds more than you did on Monday, or you microload. You add, 2.5 pounds more on Friday than you did on Monday's squat workout. Now, if you are plateauing on overhead press, bench press, either bench press or overhead press, and you're plateauing on your squat, it's a good idea to think about reducing the frequency. So instead of doing starting strength 3x5 3 times a week, now you're doing you're doing every 3 days, or every 2 days. So, before you're doing it every other day, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now you can do, Monday, the standard 3x5 A day or whatever, and then you don't do the next the B day again until Thursday. So now you have Tuesday and Wednesday, 2 full days of recovery in between workouts for your recovery to catch up with the adaptation. Because that's the big thing is, when you're doing a program like this, you're accumulating fatigue from day one. Like, that's what people don't understand. And the whole idea is a novice trainee is supposed to be able to add 5 pounds every time and recover in between. But you'll notice when you'll hit a point where you're, usually you're squatting in the mid 200s at least and deadlifting in the 300s, benching in the 200s. But you hit a point where every single freaking set and rep just feels grindy as hell. And you're battling for your life on these 3x5s. And it might sound cliche because you'll hear this all the time from people. Mark Rippetoe, his recommendation is, just finish your set. Don't be a pussy. That's what he says. He's like, if it's a grinder, just grind it out. It's supposed to feel like a grinder. You're lifting, within the maximum force capacity that you currently have. And you're forcing your body to adapt. And, if you've been in the programming world long enough, you know that you can get stronger, trying to lift faster and more explosively in submaximal lifting. But, as a novice trainee, you don't know what progression feels like. You don't know, how your body adapts and all these things. So it's better not to change the program. It's better to just keep grinding things out. But, you'll reach a point where you need to reduce the frequency. And generally the reason why it's a grinder is because it's not the adaptation part. The thing is you're so strong at this point that every set is like, substantially more stress than it used to be. So now you need more time for recovery because adaptation increases as a result of that grindy workout, but fatigue increases as well. And when you're doing grinder sets, your body's like, oh shit, I gotta adapt this because I almost died. So you're adapting and it's like, oh, it's changing, but you're so stressed. Your body's under so much physiological stress from that workout that you're going to need that extra day to recover. And so what you'll notice is if you go from doing, having 1 day of recovery in between to 2 days of recovery in between, you reduce the frequency now to an every 2 days training session. Now you notice your recovery is so much better and you're able to add more weight and keep up with the squat progression without grinding anymore. So for me personally, I'm an MMA athlete, and I train a lot of combat athletes. Typically what I'll do is I'll have them on a every 2 days progression anyway once they start to grind things out. When it's a grinder, because usually the squats and the overhead press and the bench presses are typically in that grinder area anyway. So it doesn't make sense to me to keep up with a 3-day-a-week program because that light squat day still provides us a pretty significant amount of stress for most people. Even though it's still like a 2x5, you know, or maybe it is still a 3x5. So I like to just say, screw it, just have that whole day, a whole extra day of recovery, because you can still keep progressing. It's just, you know, you're just adding, you know, one extra day per week of recovery, which is going to just, you know, take a little bit longer. But over the long run, what you'll find is if you add the extra day of recovery in between, you're able to push the linear progression a lot longer than most people. Because most people, they know starting strength is just 3 days a week, you know, every other day. You don't really hear people about you know, reducing the frequency like this. So, but it's recommended in the starting strength, in the practical programming book for the novice phase. And so I like this approach a lot. And you can consider yourself an advanced novice once you start grinding out reps, and more obviously if you fail a rep at the end, like that's the best one. But when you're grinding and the sets go from taking, you know, 45 seconds to all of a sudden taking a whole 2.5 minutes to complete, you should probably think about reducing the frequency. Like, you know, because you're, you know, is it really still a set of 5 if you're taking a whole minute in between reps with the bar on your back? Probably not. So even you can argue that the training effect's going to be better if you're able to, you know, get those sets in without the grinding, because you're taking less time in between sets. So it's more of a true set of 5. But anyway, I know Repetobi's screwing at me that I'm a pussy if I suggest that. So that's a great way to extend the life of the linear progression. And if you do that, if you just reduce the frequency, to where you're doing, you know, you have the 2 days of recovery now, then the light day idea probably isn't really even necessary, and you know, it's like kind of counterproductive. Now once you run into a plateau with the, you know, every second day linear progression model or whatever, if it's only on the squat, you could now implement that light day in between with the reduced frequency if you're still progressing on the bench press and overhead press. But chances are it's better to just change the variation, because, you know, for one thing, adaptation, eventually you reach what they call the law of accommodation, which is basically just there's only so much you can milk out of the same rep range or the same variation of exercise, the same stimulus. You got to vary the exercise a little bit, vary the stimulus just a little bit. So in practical programming, in the novice section, it's recommended towards the end of your linear progression, your novice LP, it's recommended to change to a 3x3 instead of a 3x5. And what this is going to do is it's going to reduce the overall amount of reps. It's going to change the stimulus because it's more aimed at, you know, the lower rep range now, different stimulus than the 5s. You're able to lift more weight now because there's less overall volume and less overall reps. It's easier to recover from, and there's more weight lifted. So, you know, you can think of it as peaking almost, but you're really just changing the stimulus and reducing and allowing for more recovery. And so if you're already on that reduced frequency and now you're changing to the 3x3, that again should be able to extend that linear progression for, you know, maybe another, like on the modest side, 2 weeks, but generally you probably get another 4 to 6 weeks milked out of that if you reduce the frequency at the right time and then you switch to a 3x3. Like, you could probably milk gains out for very, very long if you do this, provided that the deadlift is programmed properly to where the deadlift's not hindering your recovery, which is a lot of times a main reason why people stall out on linear progression. A lot of people can run linear progression for a very long time, you know, and I have friends who've done linear progression into squatting, you know, sets of 5 with 400 pounds, deadlifting sets of 5 with like 500 pounds, 500 to 600. Actually, no, it's like 500 pounds for sets of 5. Bench press sucks for some reason. But one person I'm thinking of in particular, he weighs like, he competes in the 183 pound class. And he was telling me how he ran fives up into the 400 pound squats with 400 pounds, sets of 5, 500 pound deadlift. And he just ran the linear progression up into there. But the key is microloading, reducing the frequency, and then changing to a 3x3, which he didn't do. But if he did, he probably could have ran it even longer. So, Another thing I want to mention though, if you do it the right way, you can milk it out. But most people just don't care enough about it. I don't know why, and they're just like, I guess they get bored. And I don't blame them, because it can be very boring when you're grinding out sets of 5 and you're waiting like 10 minutes in between sets. Most sensible coaches will change the stimulus and, make it easier and less daunting. But, if you really want the fastest rate of progress, it's kind of like what you got to do. But yeah, so that's leading into the next point. That's very important. It should have been the first thing I mentioned in this video is, most people don't rest enough in between sets. And as a coach, I see this all the time. People are just like, they want to, for one, most people think of training as cardio and conditioning. And for two, people will just get too antsy and they're like, I gotta just, leapfrog in the next set. And if you're not really listening to good music and you're not in the right mindset, those 5 to 10 minutes in between sets of 5 when you're grinding it out and you're doing sets of 5 with like 375 pounds towards the top end, you're going to be waiting a long fucking time in between. So, you'd be surprised how long you can milk out linear progression if you rest 10 minutes in between sets, which is, I'll fall asleep. I have found myself falling asleep at that point. But, at a minimum, so when you first start, you could easily just wait 2 minutes in between sets and get it through without grinding when you first start, because you're so new. After a while, it's going to change to about 3 minutes. But I found with my lifters and my clients, and myself specifically, probably because I'm just such an efficient coach, they progress really fast with me because I teach them the lifts really, really fast, and they're able to really get to that RP10 range with 3x5 pretty fast. You start needing 5 minutes minimum once you get to that mid to late 200 pound range with the squats. You need 5 minutes minimum in between sets, and that gets grindy after a while even. So, but yeah, 5 minutes minimum if you're finding it hard to get those reps and you're hitting plateaus. A lot of people are hitting plateaus because it's a fatigue issue and they're not letting themselves rest in between sets enough. And then past a certain point, you're not letting yourself rest long enough in between workouts in general. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is, if you just started a 3x5 program, especially when the sets start feeling like RP10 and you're grinding things out, it can take, 3 weeks or so before your body can get used to training at such a high intensity so frequently. So you might feel like, it's grindy, but you're still progressing in weight, which is why Riboteau says keep going. But when it gets grindy like that, from my observation, it seems like a completely different stimulus than before when you're still learning the lifts. So when that 3x5 gets hard, keep doing it and allow the reset a couple times, because that frequency is a new adaptation with that intensity, and it can just take some time to get used to it before it actually will start feeling easier again. So recovery is also something that your body can improve on, and your body can actually adapt to recovering from those high effort lifts so frequently if you keep doing them. But they'll feel really hard at first. But in general, a lot of people will experience just an overall better quality of life and more motivation to train, and less hell if they just reduce the frequency. So I recommend, for a lot of people who are just considering quitting, because a lot of people will just quit linear progression prematurely because of how hard it is to keep grinding shit out. Instead of doing it every other day, sort of do it every second day, or whatever, every third day, leaving the two days in between of rest. And it'll be a lot easier, And then, of course, after you finish the linear progression, looking into a heavy, light, medium split that involves more variation is a good idea. You could do the Texas method as well, but you've got to reduce the weight enough and build that back up so it doesn't grind you into piss and then cycle the intensity day. But I like the heavy, light, medium split a lot better. Anyway, and you could just change the rep ranges and the stimulus altogether after the end of your linear progression program by doing something like 5-3-1. But that is going to be weird because you're all of a sudden doing sets of 10 with like 100 pounds less, and probably not a good idea. And to make that work, it's going to be a lot more complicated. So unless you really want to read through Jim Wendler's books and learn all about his terminology and style of programming, which can be great because that's a really good way to change a stimulus and keep progressing, it's probably a better idea just to switch to heavy, light, medium or the Texas method. Anyway, leave your question and comments down below. Let me know what you think. Anything you need me to clarify on, I will respond in the comments. Talk till next time.